The 20s was a revolutionary time in Australia's history that brought on many new aspects of life that have ultimately influenced the way that we are living today. Within this decade came many famous events and people that shifted both the speed and style that the decade moved at. The 20s introduced a new image for women to aspire to, a drastic change to the film industry, as well as a singer people looked up to, which are all events or people who went down in history for their influence on the 20s. Women have always had an influence on everyone's lifestyles through their attitudes and styles that they carry. These styles and attitudes have changed throughout the course of history. One major change in culture that the women took on occurred in the 1920s. This change gave women new rights.
Before the 20s, women would be seen as these polite and modest figures that played an important role in the upbringing of their children. They would not often be seen without their husbands in public, and they would rarely have undertaken their own paying jobs. This was also different to what we see women doing today.
This change of women in the 20s all started when the war broke out in 1914. Many of the men left their jobs and wives to go and join the army to support the British soldiers in Europe. This presented women with the opportunity to undertake the professions that their husbands had previously occupied. They maintained these jobs throughout the war, and by the time that the soldiers had gotten back, many of them had been replaced in their jobs by women. This gave the women a whole different perspective on life, and they became much more independent, and many separated from their husbands, leading to an all-time high in divorce levels. After the major change, women would be seen smoking, wearing shorter and more controversial clothes, as well as swearing.
Many people who are researching the topic are under the misconception that women seemingly changed overnight, but the process was gradual, and the 20s was just a mere stepping stone for the process.
The introduction to talkies was another significant occurrence that took place in the 20s. The introduction to talkies revolutionized the way that we view films even to this present day. The word talkies in this phrase is referring to films with sound, and the first film containing sound was titled The Jazz Singer, and was released in October 1927. From this point on, films would be expected to contain dialogue as well as certain sound effects.
The talkies revolution brought on many positives to the Australian filmmaking industry that stretched the limits even further to how creative the world could be that the director was trying to produce. Before talkies were introduced, the actors would require more skill in order to enhance their facial and bodily gestures to allow the audience to get a hint as to what they are doing. Occasionally, accompanying their gestures would be short captions at the bottom of the screen to even further strengthen the audience perception of the film.
I remember back in my days, the time when I went to my first talkie, and I think it was about this, oh no, gosh, my Alzheimer's is kicking in again.
The film industry had struck gold with the innovation of sound to their films, and new cinemas were being built all over the cities and surrounding suburbs of Australia. It gradually changed the Australian culture, and by the end of the decade, 1 in every 3 Australians were going to the movies on a weekly basis. Talkies allowed the cinema industry to grow, and the revolution influenced how we view movies today. Dame Nellie Melba was an inspiration to almost all Australian citizens in the 1920s, and played a part in the decade's significance. She was quoted by many as the original and best opera singer that Australia has seen to date. Her face is featured on the $100 note due to the influence that she has had upon the development in Australia's history, particularly the 20s.
Nellie had music in her blood from a very young age and would take part in many choirs throughout her childhood. Those who heard her recognised her talent, and she would often be encouraged to sing at a professional level.
She first performed professionally at the age of 22 at the Melbourne Town Hall. From here on, she toured to places around Australia, and at one point she had the opportunity to tour around Europe. By this time, she was recognized all around Australia, and was slowly developing into the icon that we recognize her for today. She had a crowd following her wherever she went, and was fortunate enough to have her incredible opera voice to be the first recorded in Australia. Fans worldwide still recognize Nellie Melba's talent.
OMG, Melba, you're like my idol for life!
She announced her retirement in 1926, however her final performance was in 1927 during the opening ceremony of the Parliament House in Canberra. The 20s was a remarkable decade for Australia and is one that will be remembered for a long time. Many significant events occurred within this brief but alive period, and the people in it were the main reason for the influence on the 20s.